I'm going to introduce our panelists. So Mark Terry has enjoyed a successful 25-year career as a documentary filmmaker. His climate science films in particular have made a significant impact with the policymakers of the United Nations, something I think all aspire to do when we make documentaries. This work has been recognized on many fronts. He has been decorated with the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal, the Stephenson Medal, the Gemini Humanitarian Award, and in August 2015 was named one of Canada's greatest explorers by Canadian Geographic magazine. He continues his research today as a PhD candidate specializing in the new technologies of documentary production and dissemination in the digital and spatial humanities. And Laura Turnbull, enriching undergraduate experience at Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick, has given her a strong theoretical base and encouraged her to investigate alternative approaches to traditional scholarship. Having worked for various festivals and arts organizations in New Brunswick, she has been able to foster physical and sensory experiences of history and culture. Further study in Yemen has led her to work with Muslim societies and cultures. She's interested in helping to facilitate community-led projects that focus on self-representation and self-sovereignty through video and new media. She has had short documentaries screened at Toronto's Nuit Blanche and Take a Walk on the Riverside Festivals, as well as the Natural History Museum in Oldenburg, Germany. She graduated with an MFA from Ryerson's documentary media program, fall 2011, and is currently working on a PhD in communication and culture from York University in Toronto, Canada. So we're going to start with Mark. I'm going to try to keep the time, and one of you will keep time for me. And,
Okay, well thanks everybody, and thanks for the nice introduction. First of all, I should make a couple of apologies in advance. One is I'm running a film festival right now at the Arts and Letters Club called the Explorers Film Festival. So after this, I'm going to have to dash. So sorry, I can't stick around. And secondly, I apologize for working in a PC format. I know the entire documentary world seems to be in Apple. So there might be some technical glitches along the way. So just in case that happens, I apologize in advance. So my presentation today, can we get a full screen? Here we go, right off the bat. See, it looks fine on the monitor, it just doesn't look the same on the screen. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. Okay. So, basically the presentation is called Creative Treatments of Actuality, Digital and Spatial Turns for Social Change. Now obviously the title pays a bit of homage to the Verging definition of the documentary, with a little twist there. What I actually meant to put was not the word creative, but contemporary. Okay, so it's contemporary treatments of actuality, digital and spatial terms for social change. It's a multilinear documentary project that I'm working on, and I've been doing this for the United Nations since 2009. And traditionally, I've made a linear documentary in the beginning, and each time the films were screened to the delegates attending the COP conferences, there's a direction given by that specific audience to adjust the style and form of the documentary to best suit the policymakers. So I went from an expository documentary about Antarctica called the Antarctica Challenge, and they wanted to see more of the filmmaker in the film. So then I turned it into more of a participatory documentary when I did the follow-up film, which was called The Polar Explorer. So both films dealt obviously with the polar regions, and that was the focus back in those days. The United Nations Environment Program found that their delegates in particular really gravitated towards the medium of film to help them understand the written texts that they were using previously. Those texts were written by the climate scientists in a jargon that is very familiar to climate scientists, but not so familiar with policymakers. So when they were able to see the films that often showcased the same authors of those written texts, they had a visualization that really helped them comprehend the written word. So they've asked me to continue to make these films every single year, but it's very difficult, as you know, to independently produce a full-blown documentary every single year without any particular funding. So what I conceived of is something a little different, more of a crowdsourced documentary project called the Youth Climate Report. And let's see if I can move it along here. And I incorporated a couple of disciplines from the field of humanities into the construction of this particular project. Spatial humanities and digital humanities. And just in case you're not familiar with spatial humanities, I have this little definition. Let's see if I can read it here. Spatial humanities is a new interdisciplinary field resulting from the recent surge of scholarly interest in space. It prospects a ground upon which humanities scholars can collaborate with investigators engaged in scientific and quantitatively oriented research. This spatial turn invites an initiative focused on geographic and conceptual space. And so this was a particular interest to the policymakers because it is the United Nations and they wanted to see geographically all the climate research at one time. Oops, sorry.
Could you speak to the microphone, please?
I don't think the mic's on.
No.
Is it? All right, I'll try. How's that? Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So one of the primary tools in spatial humanities is something called a geographic information system map. And this is a mapping platform where you can actually embed various videos so you can have a 10,000-foot view of a particular issue. And this is a good definition I found within that book I showed you earlier. GIS, that's Geographic Information System, lies at the heart of the so-called spatial turn. Within a GIS, users can discover relationships that make a complex world more immediately understandable by visually detecting spatial patterns that remain hidden in text. And again, this is one of the differences that the policymakers identified to me, that they needed this extra context that the written word did not provide. And so that's why I gravitated towards that. And I also used digital humanities in particular, the way the multilinear documentary is defined by it. And here's the definition. Multilinear documentaries are not watched, but rather performed by a reader/viewer or user who is provided with a series of guided paths. And unlike the cinematic documentary, which is freestanding, multilinear documentaries may be built on multiple overlapping databases. And one of the key things in making a multilinear documentary in consideration of a GIS platform is collaboration. That's a big part of all digital humanities, is collaboration. And there's a couple of quotes here that shows how important it is. Digital humanities is necessarily collaborative. And digital humanities is collaborative and depends on networks of people. Now, when we make any kind of documentary, there's a huge collaboration involved, and even more so when you do a participatory documentary. This particular project adds another component to the collaboration, and that is the actual audience. The audience, in some restricted way, serves as the director of the project. Because it is a specific audience, not a general public audience, they're asking me for certain content to be covered with the production. So, and now the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's hope this works. This is actually the way it looks, and this particular map was made available by the United Nations on 2 of its websites. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that's the COP conference website, and the United Nations Environment Program /climate change. So they made it available on those 2 sites so that delegates and negotiators can access the map and interact with it during the conference. So there's the Framework Convention website. It's not coming up? Okay. Please stand by. Go. I don't see it here though. Oh, it's not on the screen. Oh, now you're weird. That's good. Sorry about that. Just moving down. I just want to move down the page. There we go. There we go. Okay. All right. So this is the map the way it appears on their website, and just going to try to select. All these red dots represent videos that were curated throughout the world and produced by student reporters. That's why we call it the Youth Climate Report. The idea of that is so that not only the scientific community has a voice at these conferences, but so do the young people of the world. So most of the youth reporters are actually students working with the scientists in the field. So there's a close connection to begin with. So when you okay. All right, so what usually happens is when you click on one of those red dots, it will explode a series of media that's embedded in those dots. You can give it a try if you like. I'll keep talking. No, thank you. And within the dot, there we go. I guess your fingers are just better than mine. Okay, this is a sample of one of the videos. The styles are all a little bit different. Thank you. There's actual
ways. Reportedly, we get a lot of food from the ocean, but we also use the ocean to transport our materials. A lot of grain, for example, gets transported by ships. All our food, clothing, and so we use the ocean a lot directly. Indirectly, the oceans really take care of a lot of our waste. So, for example, a lot of the CO2 that we pump into the atmosphere gets trapped by the oceans. Much of the oxygen that we breathe comes from the oceans. And so, if we want to maintain the lifestyle that we have and using the ocean the way we have, we must protect them.
Okay, I'm not going to show you the whole video, but you kind of get the idea. There's basically a climate scientist explaining the work that they're doing and the latest findings that they have, and there's some B-roll added by the student to make it a bit more visually appealing to the policymaker. So.
Opposite of.
Yes. It doesn't want a mirror.
You go on and just go through here.
Okay, that's okay. So basically, what happened this year, which was a first time for the project, was I was invited to be an official member of the Canadian delegation to the COP conference in Paris, and that was a great honor because I actually got to attend and participate in negotiation sessions, and there were two projects that we actually brought, the GIS map that you just saw, but also a traditional linear documentary that we had special screenings of. And the difference between the two was basically every single video that was provided by a student reporter from around the world made it to the map, but only selected videos were used in the creation of the 45-minute documentary that's screened throughout the conference as well. So how we collected the videos is through a series of digital curation methods. Both the student reporters and filmmakers and climate scientists researchers were recruited for the project, and in some cases students were trained. And we had a little training session available on the Youth Climate Report website. So we did this so nobody is excluded. If any student wanted to participate and have a voice and make a contribution to the COP conferences, they could, even if they didn't have any filming experience at all. And so some of the methods we used were through social media and our own website. That's how we did a lot of the recruiting. Video online media coverage. We had support from media around the world promoting our project. And partner recruitment from the universities and climate organizations that provided the scientists that were profiled in the videos. And video interviews collected via digital portals and were archived. And the way we did that was through uploads to the Youth Climate Report YouTube channel, via FTP sites and online file transfer sites such as Dropbox, and if they're small enough, as attachments to email. Digital archiving. So once you create something like this, it's not just used once. There needs to be an archive created because the historical data becomes part of the overall data for future conferences as well. So the curated videos were digitally archived in their submitted form as well as in their edited forms, so that we had the raw data as well as the clean videos. And some of the locations were the United Nations Environment Program's digital archives. It's on a physical hard drive. The Neko Harbor Entertainment Digital Archives, that's the name of my production company, so we have our own hard drive to back things up with. And online on the YouTube channel of the Youth Climate Report. And online in the GIS map created for the project on the Google Drive that you saw. And online and live on the UNEP and UNFCCC websites. So that way there's lots of backup and lots of resources where these videos are archived that can be accessed later. Digital dissemination. How did we get this project out? How did we get the video out there to everybody? All individual video interviews submitted by the students are included in the GIS map, as I mentioned before. Videos selected from all submissions were used in the 45-minute feature film version, which is Youth Climate Report 6. Incidentally, it's screening right now at the Arts and Letters Club, and one of the filmmakers is actually there introducing. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Paris on November 30th to December 11th is when it showed. All videos were digitally disseminated in the following ways. There we go. By the UNFCCC to all conference delegates and media via a link to a site managed by the United Nations Environment Program. That was one way. And also by a wall-mounted touchscreen monitor on site at the conference, allowing for delegate interaction within the GIS map. Now they also had headsets, so they could put it on and actually hear it without disturbing everybody else. And through the websites and social media portals of all participating partner universities, organizations, and the media worldwide. And also through social media. We didn't want to make this an exclusive project just for the UN conference. We wanted to make this available, as did the UN, to the general public and the media as well. And so we did that through social media. This is not the kind of project that has a general public appeal to it. It's not constructed that way. It's nothing you would see on television or in the theaters, but still, it's because it's mainly a digitally created project, most of it is online. And these were some of the sites that we have. We have our Facebook page and our Twitter account, and of course our YouTube channel. And these are the various organizations that we directly partnered with in the production and exhibition of this particular film. So, on that note, I'll wind things up. And if you really want a good demonstration of how this works, see me later with my PC, and we'll walk you through it. Thanks, Eric.
All right, so
So the title of my presentation for today is Indigenous Self-Representation and Self-Sovereignty. As a preface, especially in diverse audiences, I find it helpful to define the term you're using. So in the context of today, I'm looking at self-sovereignty as to have supreme power or authority over oneself. So you can kind of think of it in the flip of being colonized. And new media, loosely defined as digital, interactive, and or networkable content that involves user feedback and creative interaction, such as net and video art, video games, geographic information systems, interactive installations, podcasts, and stereoscopic photography. And we can add to that, of course. So I think it's important to always situate yourself as an academic or a documentarian. I strongly believe in the power of the narrative, and I'm more interested in the power of documentary video for the collaborators than for the audience. And while I acknowledge the importance of the audience, that's not what I'm primarily interested in. In that context, I just recently switched work. I had prepared and been involved with the country of Yemen for 7 years and was going to do dissertation work there. And I think it's really important to share with you that Yemen right now is in a humanitarian crisis. And for anyone who was here yesterday, when we were talking about Syria, in Yemen right now, more than 80% of the population is in dire need of water, food, and fuel. They have a population of around 25 million, and there are estimates that approximately 2 million Yemenis are displaced. And their neighboring countries are like Djibouti and Somalia, who do not have the infrastructure to help. This is my friend Omar, and one of the reasons why I switched my work from Yemen for my academic work is because I couldn't emotionally do it anymore, and I needed sort of a line drawn. And that happened when, on Facebook one morning, scrolling through, and if anyone is familiar with like social media in the Middle East, like images on Facebook are very graphic. So images of the violence, you see mutilated bodies, children with half heads. And so scrolling through, I see a picture of what I think is my friend Omar and figure out is my friend Omar with like a mutilated body. And like this was my morning Facebook routine. And so I want people to know about Yemen, and I want people to care, and I want you to go home and like look Yemen up. But for my own mental health, I've kind of moved on from that. So that's where my background is. But now I'm sort of switching and working with Indigenous youth in Canada, and it doesn't seem to kind of go, it's kind of weird. But the approach I'm using and the community-led projects where self-representation and self-sovereignty are foremost is the connection between this work. To further situate myself, I am a settler, and because of this and the history of Canada and the current situation, I am privileged. So, Wabkanu notes that Indigenous youth in Canada are our greatest untapped resource. So that's sort of the preface for the work I want to So the work I have proposed is with a community in rural New Brunswick. Most people know them as Maliseet, but their name is Wolastoqwani people of the beautiful river. They number in around 4,000 in the province compared to the Mi'kmaq, which are around 60,000, and most people know more about the Mi'kmaq than they do Wolastoqwani. Because of their low numbers, they don't share the same visibility culture, like nationally or even in First Nations circles. And so for that reason, and cultural preservation and language preservation, there are only around 400 speakers of Wolastoqwani. This project, New Media, is a great medium to bring to youth, to share with youth. So I'm going to show you today some examples of where we've been in Canada with Indigenous representation online, but also all of that sort of umbrellaing the fact that I've proposed this and I plan to put this in action as a community-led project. It should also be noted that because of ethics within First Nations community, which I think is absolutely wonderful but hard for documentarians, everything produced within the community, even if you're creating it, belongs to the community. And that's, self-sovereignty, that's taking control. I think that's great, but it's really hard for a lot of documentarians. Okay, so we know that through research that self-determination and self-representation lead to self-sovereignty, and self-sovereignty can have major impacts on health, survival, mobilization, transformation, and great transformation of youth. That's the value in it. So I'm going to show you some examples of kind of where we've come from. You may be familiar with some of these. I'm not sure, the audience. And I'm only going to play a little bit of each just because of time. I want to give you a sample. So I'm going to start with Alanis Obamsawin, who has worked for the NFB and was kind of instrumental from the beginning of the 70s of bringing an Indigenous perspective. So this is one of her earlier films.
Is on an island located in Moose River among the tidal flats of James Bay's lowlands, opposite Moosonee. The village has a population of about 1,500 people, Crees of the Algonquin Nation. The children of Moose Factory speak Swampy Cree and also English as their second language. Here, they speak with their drawings about life around them and how they feel when Christmas time comes.
This is my mother making bannock. She's ready to put it in the oven. When it's ready, we take one. I like to drink tea, coffee, orange juice, Coke, and ginger ale, and Pepsi, and homebrew.
A very small sample of that. I encourage you to go check it out further. Also, Sama TV, if anyone's familiar with this, it is absolutely amazing. It's kind of like an Indigenous YouTube with further support for Indigenous makers. It was sort of started by Zacharias Canute, who did Artagenowat, Fast Runner. And his impact in the north is absolutely amazing in having fully Inuit production teams, so changing the actual process of filmmaking. And as I'm going to mention in a bit, that has a major impact for how we see reality from an Indigenous epistemology. So encourage you to check out Sama, which is great. And you can get lost there for hours and hours with content. Also, Zachariah has, because of internet access not being accessible to all Canadians, which is something I always get really frustrated with in documentary circles when we talk about new media or access. Like, most of the world does not have access to, on the internet. So he's like actually created a portable system where the content of Usama is on it. So Indigenous Arctic people's content for the homes, because all that they've been able to get is American like TV through satellite. So this content is available so that for the first time you have youth seeing content that represents their reality and themselves. This is Sama. Another example, I am not going to say the name because I don't know how to correctly present it, but we have a lot of projects happening around residential schools, which is really, really important. This one is kind of community-led, asking for further content to always be added. So for example, these videos were added relatively recently, and they look at the multi-generational impact of residential schools. So as we know, those are still being felt among First Nations today, and they're still being, the government's still assimilating, they're trying to assimilate them through their actions. So this is like video, it's a little more engaging, but it's not quite like media yet, but it's Indigenous representation. They're taking control of their own image. And then we have, this is what I want. Organization like Wapikoni Mobile, which is like a bus, a silver bus that goes around to Indigenous communities where they teach youth digital practices or video practices, and then they can produce content, whether it's fictional or documentary. But this is sort of where we start to see the molding of what a Western colonial idea of reality and documentary and in an Indigenous perspective. So I'm going to play you the first of this movie by Nodine Wawati called Dance Warrior. Oops.
Migwacho yake kujikskini mya migwach kujikskama namazia tumigwach.
I also should mention that I forgot to mention that I understand and am constantly questioning my perspective as a settler, as a white woman, but that I strongly believe, as called for by the Truth and Reconciliation, that we all need to be allies and we all need to be active in changing the current situation in Canada. And being a good ally means giving up power and giving up space. And so having community-led projects where you give over your creative control is one step in that direction, I believe. Repeatedly, Indigenous scholars have noted that the perception of First Nations individuals as relics of the past must be changed. I don't know if anyone can think of a popular Hollywood movie where a First Nations or Indigenous character was not in the past, represented in the past, or as the stereotypical healer or shaman or elder, but like a contemporary Indigenous person living today in society. If you can tell me, because I would like to know. So we see this fusion now happening, and the benefits of these cultural celebrations as artists fuse traditional technology and practice. So for example, Shane Purley-Dutcher takes traditional basket weaving and weaves it into metal jewelry and objects. His brother Jeremy Dutcher is using the National Archives and cylinders recorded by an anthropologist in 1912 from his community and writing them as operas. And then we have, as mentioned yesterday, Tribe Called Red. Running out of time, so I'm not going to play you their clip, but if you don't know about them, you should check them out because they do amazing electric powwow that has just, in the last 5 years, going to powwows in like central Canada and like the East Coast, we're seeing that like you have the powwow dancers and then you have like in like breaks and stuff, they're playing Tribe Called Red. And before this wasn't happening, so there's this kind of exciting fusion going on. So these are very like video-based projects, and we don't really have as many interactive Indigenous projects out there. AbTech is doing some great work. They have a program called Time Traveler, which is kind of like a Second Life character where you can look for your people and your ancestors and be a character and kind of go through past, or you can create a character based on an ancestor, and all of that content is historical. Then you have NFB Interactive. If you're not familiar with that, you need to enjoy it because it's absolutely amazing. And this, I think, can really demonstrate what interactive media can be. Arctic storytelling and game Never Alone, where you can be an Inuit character with a little fox and you can play the game online. And then, sorry, I'll kind of conclude here with the possibilities of new media and why it's important from an Aboriginal perspective and why it should be considered in documentary. Aboriginal determined territories in cyberspace can complete Aboriginal culture as it preserves it and produces it. So issues with language loss, it's helping to preserve that, and it's continuing to produce new artistic modes and fuse traditional practices and contemporary art. Interactive, nonlinear, sensory engaged, and wide angles allow the past and present to exist at the same time. Decolonizing narrative, artistic process, and product. Possibly capturing, through like panoramic photo or a 360, sacred sites, and valuing the spirit worlds and the worlds in between from past and present, and not necessarily distinguishable from every day. So if you watch like Artigenuit, for example, there are times when you don't know what's a ghost, what's the spirit world, and what is like present day or the human world. And so with an indigenous perspective, there's no separation. Your ancestors, your spirits live among you. And so the past and present is existing at one time. And new media can provide space and geography for that. So just concluding, strategies of claiming spaces or indigenizing spaces support and transmit modes of expression and methodology that assert diverse cultural autonomy, self-determination, and cultural continuance through storytelling. As Candace Hopkins puts it, and she's an amazing indigenous new media academic and artist, storytellers are continually embracing new materials and technologies such as video and digital media, materials that ensure that these practices maintain their relevance. I would suggest that this move does not threaten storytelling tradition, but is merely a continuation of what Aboriginal people have been doing forever, making things their own. I think that Native people have a strong desire to create community and create territory wherever they are. Cyberspace is no exception. I encourage you to go check out the examples I've suggested, but didn't have time to peruse. Thank you.
So my presentation is titled, it's not in here, it's titled From Real, R-E-E-L, Past to Digital Futures. And I'm going to describe to you an ongoing project that hopefully I'll complete in the next 6 months. I'm working within the framework of research creation, so it's both a creative process and a research project. And it is slightly interactive. It is participatory with a community, and the goal is to digitally re-inscribe Palestinians back into a space in Jerusalem that was Palestinian until 1948 and Israeli ever since. So I have the dubious privilege of being twice a settler. I was born in Israel, 7th generation Israeli, and I'm an immigrant to Canada, so the way that those privileges position me and the way that I'm trying to work with it are complex, and also in some ways led to this project taking a long time, which is something maybe I shouldn't be telling graduate students, but or funders. They don't like that, but I think it's part of the intellectual life and ethical life of projects on tricky issues, which I think is often the case with documentaries, so it's important to mention. Okay. So this is a movie theater, a kind of art theater with a cafe in front. And it was established in the 1930s by German, it's in the German colony Jerusalem. It was established by a German owner and German architect, and it was called the Orient at first. And then as the Second World War erupted, Germans couldn't own, and 2 men bought it. One of them, his name is Ferdinand Stacklef. He was a 5th generation Macedonian in Jerusalem. I'm not sure whether he called himself Palestinian until 48, but certainly after 48. So I'm going to show you a short video that will be, some version of that will be starting the project.
Maybe before we talk about the memories of this place, my grandfather Fuad, who used to be teacher in Jerusalem before 48, his first date with my grandma was here.
My mother used to come here and watch movies. Often she would sneak in with Hela Sakakini and watch movies while her father and Khalil Sakakini were on the board of censor.
يعني يا منى بدنا نحكي كم شغله. اول شيء كل مرينا شو انتم قلتوا على القطعه الموجوده هون. اثنين شيء مخزي. شو يعني مخزي؟ shameful. كيف بحاولوا يمحوا ذاكرة هذا المكان. في هنا لافتة ممكن بالكاميرا تجيبها اللافتة يا شالت، وفي تفاصيل عن المكان بس اسم نامدو بالمرة مش موجود. هذا مخزي، هذا مش بس هذا رخيص. يعني زول انه كيف بيحاولوا يمحوا ذاكرة. وقبل شوي كنا جوا وشفنا بنت اخو نامدو مارينا بكت لما شافت انه كيف مشروع سيدها عمها نامدو اليوم هي بتفوت عليه وبتدفع تذكرة. هذا جنون.
The sign that he's talking about is this sign, which is very typical for what's happening in that area of Jerusalem. And actually the English translation doesn't correlate to the Hebrew one. And in the Hebrew one, there is a long section about the person who started operating the theater in 1949, named it Smadar, how all kind of his own history. So they very selectively chose one owner to describe and not the previous owners. And this is what's happening with everything in those areas. There is no physical manifestation of the history of the neighborhood. There are plaques that will describe battles in 1948, of course from an Israeli perspective. All the street names, to the extent that there were names before 48, they have been changed. They're by and large very militaristic or biblical names. And the only thing that actually persisted is the Arabic names of the neighborhoods Baqa and Katamon and Talbiya. The Hebrew names did not catch on. So it's this kind of erasure in the space that I'm hoping to trouble and shake a little bit. I have to say something about my initial goal was to do an intervention in the space, and what I've imagined was to work and do videos with families from the neighborhood, which I'm doing, and then project them on the actual houses that they lived in. And a few things happened, and that made it shift to be an online interactive project. And the main of them is that I realized that most of the Palestinians don't have access to this part of Jerusalem. And even when they have access, physical access, they don't have psychological access. So of course my inclination to do that was in order to work with Israeli audiences, which I still want to find a way to do. But my priority became to first and foremost work with the Palestinian audiences and the descendants of the neighborhood, and that's why it became online and interactive. So, so who are we? You saw the three of us. Anwar Ben Badis is a Palestinian from the Galilee. He has been living in Jerusalem for a long time. He's a linguist by training, but he's a historian, he's a Renaissance man, and I'm very lucky that I've met him. I've learned a lot from him. So he joined the project as one of my, in a way, collaborators, which is a very unfortunate term to use when you have Palestinians and Israelis working together. But the other one on my right is Mona Halabi, and Mona was born in Egypt and raised in Switzerland, and she has been living all her adult life in California. She is from Baqa, from not far from there, and she has started, she's a third grade teacher, and she just started mapping the neighborhood, kind of putting her son taught her how to put pins on a Google map and add the names of people that she knew, and she started collecting pictures. And recently, about a year and a half ago maybe, she started a Facebook page called British Mandate Jerusalem Photo Archive, which you can see where she has photos from that era. She tries to make it quite apolitical, but it is very political, of course, in a very kind of deep way. So she doesn't like straightforward political comments. And what we are going to do is basically we're going to use Google Street View with the wonderful help of Helios, and Mike from Helios is here, so if you have questions about technicalities, talk to Mike. And we're going to use Google Street View to go on a walk, a virtual walk in the neighborhood. Wherever we have participants, the walk will be guided by Muna in English and Anwar in Arabic, with all of us are walking together. So there is some Hebrew, there is some conversations between us. And when we get to certain houses, there will be hotspots where you can watch a video with the family. There will be other audio files. There will be documents when we have them and pictures when we have them. So I'm just going to give you a quick example of one family. Sorry, this is an aerial from 1946, and this aerial actually we realize now that it's much older, but it's dated on the bottom 1946. That and a map also from that era enabled us to kind of have a sense of what the neighborhood was like. I've also done aerial photography in 2014 with a meteorological balloon and a little very cheap digital camera stuck into a Coke bottle with some elastic bands that keep it just filming, and I can talk about that more to anyone who is interested. It's a really great way to do any geographical work with do-it-yourself, very cheap technology. And I want to talk about just one family of participants to give you an example of what it will look like. So on the left is Muna, and on the right is Radir Dajani. And I met Muna by accident at the washroom of a conference. She lost her ring and I found it, and I saw her looking for something, and I approached her, and it turned out that she said she's from the neighborhood. She lives in East Jerusalem. She has never been to the neighborhood, which completely shocked me. There was a story why, and we started with her sister. We started looking for the house. Her father was 2 in 1948. Her uncle was, who's seen in this picture, was 4. They have been to the house once after 1967. Her uncle kept telling us he knows where the house is, but every time we had an appointment to go there, he would have to cancel for some reason. And eventually, I proposed to them that maybe he doesn't know, and he's ashamed to tell, which was what happened. We looked and looked and looked, and we couldn't find the house, and we don't know whether it still exists or has been destroyed and something else has been built. Radir is an interior designer, so I proposed to her that based on her uncle's memories from that one visit from 1967, he will draw a floor plan, and she started design, and you can see it on the computer, she started design a 3D model of the house. When we realized we can't find the house, I approached her third sister, Nada, who is in the middle here. She was pregnant at the time. She is a creative writer, and we started talking about her writing some piece. We weren't quite sure how the pieces will work together. This is, I've been meeting the family for months and months. I was in Jerusalem for the year. That was easy. It was easier. It was face-to-face. Some of my work with people has been all through Skype. And one day, Nada and I sent each other emails that kind of crossed the way, where I said she was at the end of her pregnancy, and both of us had the same idea that she would write a letter to her unborn daughter. And that letter and Radir's model became an animation that I'm going to show you just the beginning of right now.
هوية. هاي الأرض اللي عم تمشي عليها إلك انتي. دفى الشمس على وجهك مش غريب عنك، ولا نقط المطر اللي بتدغدغك. خطواتك كلها ثقة وانتي عم تمشي. الهوا هو ذاته اللي تنفستيه مع أول نفس إلك في الدنيا. عم تتنفسيه زي ما هو، مليان بساطة وندى بدون ما تفكري حتى. الأبجدية الغريبة حواليك ما بتشكل عائق قدامك، بتطلع عليهم وكأنهم مألوفين لإلك. الشوارع بتميز خطواتك، والبيوت بتعرف وجهك. العصافير بتناديكي لما النسيم المارق يرفع خصل من شعرك في الهواء. البيوت كلها كرامة وهي واقفة على الأرض، واقفين بيت جنب التاني وهم ساكتين. تتمشي بين البيوت اللي أصلا مش ملكك ولا ملك ذكرياتك، بس مع هيك بتطلع عليهم بعيون مليانة عطف، جواتهم ذكريات مش ذكرياتك بس بتحسي فيهم حواليكي. وأخيرا توصلي لآخر رحلتك، إجريكي بوقفوكي مكانك، وقتها بتتركي كل ذرة فيكي تتشرب محيطك، ريحة شجرة الياسمين بسياج الحجر، بتصيري تتأملي كيف هالشجيرة بتكبر وبتنمو على سكت، وبتصيري تسمع المية كيف بتمشي بغصونها ووراءها. شوي شوي بتقربي منها وتقطفي أحلى ياسمينة منهم وبتحطيها في عروة بلوزتك، وانت عم تمشي بعد السياج البيت بنور بسعادة بتغمره، وانت كمان قصص بتغمرك يا أغلى ليلى، تمسكي فيهم واعتني فيهم جواتك، اكبروا سوا وما عمرك رح تضيعي. خالتك المحبة منى.
ماما وبابا بيحبوا.
So this is the first half of the video. I'm also hoping to do a second video with this family because, and here you can see the balloon that we use in order to do the aerial photography. This family now lives in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in northern Jerusalem, and their house has been threatened for the past 30 years by settlers who are trying to take over. So in Sheikh Jarrah, before 48, there were Jewish families who lived there alongside mostly Muslim families, and there are settlers who are trying to claim those houses, which is very interesting because in principle, that means that all the Palestinians should be able to claim their houses in West Jerusalem, but of course the Israeli law doesn't work that way. So I actually got a hold of the settler plans, and you can see that the whole neighborhood will be erased, completely erased to the ground. High-rises will be built, gardens, and that is very important to me because we often talk about the Nakba, the disaster of 1948, Palestinian disaster, as something that has ended, but it actually has never ended. Palestinians are still being expelled, they still lose their houses. There's a phenomenon in Gaza every time Israel attacks Gaza where people don't leave their houses, first because they don't have anywhere to go, and of course there is no cement to build bomb shelters, but also people say, we fled Jaffa once, we fled Asdod, we fled Askelon, we are not going to leave our houses again. If we have to die, we will die here. So the Nakba is not something that ended. It's not a past, it's an ongoing process. And it's really important for me to make this project not just about the past, not about just nostalgia, not just about memories or even getting information, which is what most of the Palestinians, their most immediate need when they meet me, is to see if I can get them documents or if we can find photos, maps, all those things. But actually to make it about the present erasure and about a potential future inclusion, about imagining a return, about imagining what it will be like to actually share this space. I'll talk very briefly just before I close up about the other side of the project. And this is what we have done is we have taken every house that existed before 1948 and we have made that into a live link. And this is a remapping project that we're using hand-drawn maps and people's memories to kind of locate who lived in which houses. We add photos when we have them, we add stories. And when the project goes live, of course, we anticipate to get a lot more information, more cross-references, some of the houses were duplexes and had multiple apartments, some were investment properties, so they were rented. So we will be able to kind of slowly map the diversity of who lived there, and that will allow a community that was dispersed very brutally by a war to also kind of come together in other ways. There's a lot to say about ethics, but this is not the focus of this conference, so I'm going to stop here. Happy to chat with people later.